And let me hand over to you, Sabrina. Thank you very
Great,
much.
thanks. Thanks so much, Pierre. Can I just get screen share, please?
I thought you had already, but let me
Oh, there we go.
confirm that.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, everybody, and welcome to the second part of our media training series, where we'll be focusing around foresight, and we are really digging into how we can report on climate information and thinking about agriculture. So thanks to everybody who's joined us in the first session and for those coming back for the second one. If you weren't with us for the first session, we'd just be really interested to just give us an introduction in the chat box. That would be great, just in case we didn't hear. And we were asking people in the first session to essentially say what journalism or media you worked in. So, for example, if you were working on radio or you are more in broadcast, and we were really interested to hear what and who your audience targets. So if you're new, please give us a bit more information about the work you're doing. That'll be really useful. And just to check everybody's energy, yeah, to see where everyone's at, we just wanted to run a quick poll to check how everybody's doing. We always wish we could be a little bit more in person with everyone. So we just wanted to check everyone's energy and see how they're doing. So are we feeling ready? Are we feeling really well? We're not sure. If we're sleepy, then we know we can really work on trying to get everyone fired up. Yeah, so if you can yeah, just respond to the poll, it'd be great. And we can get a sense of how everybody's energy levels are this Wednesday. We know everyone's in a bit of different time zones as well. Let's see, we've got about 50% of the vote, so a couple more votes and then we can stop the poll. But so far results are looking good. Everyone's ready to roll, which is fantastic. Okay, I think we can stop the poll. Great. 70% of us are ready to engage and about 24% really well. So, and one of us is very sleepy, so we'll work really hard on making sure we can hopefully wake you up by the end of the session. So just to give a little bit of a background, this training has been put together by a much wider team than you're seeing here. We have colleagues from Cadesa and Bridget, who's online here, who's been helping lead and put this together with us, myself and Constance being the lead trainers, with oversight from Dr. Baitsi Podisi, who you met on Monday, and also Dr. Philip Thornton, who is online today. So a big thanks to this wider team. And as mentioned, we're really lucky each session to have a really nice set of expert guest speakers who are giving us a whole set of different angles and their role around media, around future reporting, climate expertise, etc. So we're really, really pleased and grateful to have these speakers. And also there's a whole much wider communication and research team, as you've met Pierre, and our French translation colleagues, Serge and David, helping out, as well as Futi, Deborah and Lily, who have also been helping on this series. So a big thank you to the wider team. And really the objectives are, we're hoping to really stimulate and create some of these networks around climate change and agriculture, as well as the role on foresight. I think those who were here on Monday and heard Baitsi's kind of overview of why we're doing a lot of work on trying to look at foresight and the role of future planning is really saying, as media, you have a really critical role in terms of being able to get across to a much wider popular audience about these long-term trends, long-term impacts, and how to engage this wider audience in that role. So really looking throughout the series to guide this, and then also bring power sort of tips and evidence together to say, how do we create these much more sort of powerful narrative stories to engage people in these long-term topics. And we're in part 2 here of our training, and today we'll be really trying to look at communicating from a deeper understanding. So looking at some key aspects and tools within this foresight approach. And we'll also be hearing from Godfred joining us from Ghana, who's really going to show his experience and examples of how do you communicate these kind of more complex topics to a much sort of wider audience. And a Monday next week going into more around evidence and misinformation and how to really play on the role of mass movements. And then on our final session next Wednesday, we have a government representative joining us from South Africa, who's really going to show how they use media in terms of behavior change very critically to address climate issues, and then also going through a real checklist and next steps in terms of our training team. So today we're really going to be unpacking two key foresight approaches in terms of systems thinking and causal analysis. We're going to be looking at an example of climate and emergencies and how that would be reported. And then this more insight in terms of communicating to a wider audience. And then we'll be looking at another foresight approach, which is called backcasting, which really looks at how do we can use the media in the role of achieving targets, and how looking where we want to get to and moving backwards is a really powerful tool you can bring into your work. So I think I've gone over the objectives today, so I'll skip over that. So just very briefly, we touched on this on Monday when we gave an introduction to both climate impacts as well as foresight. And I think Baitsi really helped to frame the series so nicely to show that we're trying to really build a stronger capacity to say we're dealing with climate change, we're dealing with change in the agricultural systems, that it's not just 1 year or an initial event we need to report on. We really need to be getting people to think 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ahead. And Foresight's really trying to be to bring a skill set around doing this. And so we have these two stages around what's happening now, the situation, and how do we then bring that into long-term planning. And with that, in terms of foresight, we always have this element running across the whole process around foresight. And I think we've just wanted to highlight this as a critical role you as media personnel have in terms of data, evidence, knowledge, and creativity. So to a foresight process, this is critical across all stages and steps, and moving from questions of understanding what's happening now. And then really a foresight process ends by saying, what will we do differently? So just to kind of say, hoping you feel very embedded into how critical you are to a foresight process in terms of really bringing the evidence, the data, engaging people, and participation. And we didn't get a chance to ask this on Monday. And so in the chat box, we just wanted to ask, we did present a few, and if you're new, it doesn't matter, because this is just an open question. If you think about the future, could you tell us a characteristic you think you have, a future thinking characteristic? Are you able to plan, or so any kind of responses in terms of thinking, I have a certain characteristic. If you remember on Monday, we did sort of give some prompts around this, and our guest speaker, Dave Duarte, also said about some of the critical roles around this kind of future planning. So if you have some of those characteristics, it would be really nice to know that. And we'll keep checking back in the chat box. And thank you so much, Busani, for seeing your introduction. That's great. So just to sort of round off this in terms of going back to why this series and why around climate change in agriculture and foresight is really trying to unpack these key questions around what seems to be happening, what's really happening, what might happen, and what do we need to do. And today's session really unpacks the second part of this question, what's really happening. And so these kind of two core foresight areas that we're going to do really unpack that. And then just to remember that in a foresight process, we look into the past. We then take a deep dive into assess what's happening now, and we use that to be able to anticipate the future. And so just to not overcomplicate things too much, but in terms of a foresight process, there's lots of methods and tools and ways you can approach it. So today we're going to be showing you a couple of these and trying to very much kind of ground them in media work. So with that, I will hand over to my colleague Constance, who's going to run us through the next set of sessions. Constance, over to you.
Fantastic. I just need to be able to share my screen and I'm ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for the responses, everybody.
Can you share your screen, Constance?
I've got it. Yeah, I hope that's right. Yeah, super. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. Thanks to all who are here. So we're going to dig into some of those tools and methods that we use inside of the Foresight approach and look at thinking in systems as well as causal analysis. So first thing, I know we're all watching feverishly the COP26, what is coming out of Glasgow and this conference of parties around climate change. And two of our international heroes, Vanessa Nakate from Uganda and Greta Thunberg, and they just wrote an open letter to the media, which I thought was fascinating, which is, yes, you're covering all of these symptoms of a destabilizing planet, but we also need you to talk to us more about the bigger picture. What are some of the fundamental issues around time? How do we take a more holistic approach and make sure that we're covering issues of justice? So I thought that that was a really nice intro. And so then I wanted to just bring us back to talk a bit about what are we doing in this next session and why are we doing it? So we're focusing in this session on food systems and climate resilience. And to truly understand that, we have to understand the elements and the stakeholders that are associated with that system and how they interrelate. We need to know what's driving those systems. What is the root cause of the issues that we are having to overcome, and who must be involved in those solutions? And then when I took a look at what is solutions journalism, it requires similar things, right? It needs to be focused on stories with underpinning evidence about why things are happening. Could it be prevented? To solve societal issues and to be very, very honest about the solutions that we are seeing. So I want to start in and just describe a food system. So the food systems are, and I'm just going to read the key highlights here, complex web of activities that are ongoing, involving production, process, transport, and consumption, connecting all people to their food. And it takes into account all of the elements of the system, including the governance, the economics around food production. How are we sustaining this? To what degree are we wasting food? And how is food production affecting the natural environment and ultimately impacting our health? So if you look at that carefully, what you see is that there are many, many actors. There are many, many decisions being taken around to ensure that the food system is functioning and, as we're hoping for, resilient. And so subsequently, there are many points of influence. So I'm not going to focus too deeply on this, but I just want to remind ourselves, I know we have farmers with us, people who farm and also have other professional activities. And so, as you know, there are many outcomes that have to come from an individual farming system. From the production side, how is the land being managed? How are we sustaining the land? What crops, what trees, what livestock or fish we're keeping, and to make a real production system that gives us an outcome that also supports our socioeconomic selves. So there are a lot of different decisions being taken, and I will tell you there's an entire science around farming systems and how they work. So if we were to place that farming system into the broader food system that we've just discussed, we find that that farming system has impacts and is influenced by the environment, obviously can influence and be influenced by the economic system, How does the value chain support it? And then there are all the socio-cultural dimensions about, you know, where are the women? Are there women's groups that are able to help with these farming systems, production systems, youth engagement, education? So I want to use that for just a moment to think about this system and talk about some of the drivers, because we talk about drivers sometimes in a silo, but the drivers are those factors, those issues, those trends that we're all monitoring, and those cause the change and ultimately can shape the future. So I want you just to pretend that all of this food system, all of these elements are tied together by a string. And if you have one thing change, so for example, if the food prices go up and you have a real hike, then you're going to see impacts across the food system. Can you imagine? And we've all been there. The food prices go up and you see that people can't afford their basic commodities. Subsequently, they can't afford their school fees. They may need additional aid. And there could be issues of people having to seek additional work, reduced spending power. So that's an economic driver that you can see has an effect throughout the system. And these are all things that you need to understand if you want to give a robust story. So another one is an environmental driver, and that's around land degradation. So we talk about land degradation across Africa, and what we're finding is that it pulls on many, many strings within the food system as well. So you get a loss of biodiversity, a loss of diversity of species. You perhaps subsequently have losses of water holding capacity. So those are some of the environmental pulls. But then you're going to see potentially a loss of production, lower production, a need potentially again for food aid, reduced spending power. You may start to see migration, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want you to think about these things in terms of the wider implications when we're reporting on one element, such as land degradation or food prices. So that was some of the implications around the drivers. The other part of that is to understand what's underneath these barriers that we face. So we often treat symptoms, and I'll go into that a little bit more, instead of what's really at the root cause. And I find that root cause, the term has made it into the media quite a lot. And we know that we have to address those root causes when we're planning or intervening. But if we're going to communicate about our problems in the food system around climate change, we also need to talk about the underlying causes. So a root cause analysis, or a simple causal analysis, is what we use to understand what lies beneath. What are those underpinning causes that are going to keep us from achieving a desired outcome? I want to take the example of water, and Sabrina showed this slide last time, and you'll recall there are a lot of issues around water that are associated with the climate change impacts that we're seeing. And I just added a fourth one here, because as we go into water, I do want us to recall that we also have an enormous amount of land degradation and in many cases desertification in Africa. And water and land, those of us that are farming, we know they're related. So I just wanted to add that into our water story. So let's unpack a water scarcity example. And this is it's not tied to a specific context, but I want to talk about what's underneath and what are some of the implications when we don't treat the root causes. So if we start out on some of the causes, we're going to see that, for example, there may be an overuse of the available water resources. We may be seeing the resources go down. What's underneath that? Maybe an overuse, maybe an exploitation situation where you have large scale agriculture, perhaps exploiting that. You may have a lack of an idea that we really need to conserve our water. you may even have an underlying effect of greed. And up there, you may see a lack of awareness of urban users when it comes to water use. You may also have a lack of effective water management or land management practices that are keeping us from capturing the water that does fall. And this could be because we're tying all of our water management to a water department versus a cross-sectoral thinking around our water. We may see more unsustainable practices. This could become coming from a lack of awareness or information availability. It could be a weak extension advisory service. They don't have the capacity to get out and work on these issues. And last but not least, we talk about reduced rainfall because of the weather patterns, but we also know that we're seeing siltation in the dams, we're getting soil runoff, we have bare ground, we're losing biodiversity, and we're still looking at potentially poor land management. So what we've just done is look at a number of causes that could be behind a water scarcity issue. And if we don't treat this, we're probably going to continue to see women and girls seeking more, spending more time seeking water, potentially marginalization of different groups, losses of livelihoods. In some cases, we're seeing a loss of tourism. You may get to the point where people are migrating out. There could be conflicts over water, increased disease prevalence, and lack of sanitation, etc. So, and reduced capacity to adapt to climate change. So this is a system dynamic where we are seeing that there are many underlying causes. And if we really wanted to think about this in terms of the different dimensions, we're seeing social causes, economic causes, political causes, institutional causes, and we're also seeing environmental causes. And these have, if not addressed, these have many social and environmental outcomes that are not wanted. So if you are trying to cover a story on water scarcity, I just want you to put into the chat box, if you will, based on what we've just done, this causal analysis, I would want to interview who? Two different people that you, or groups that you would want to interview to tell a more complete story. So if you could just fill in the blank, based on this causal analysis, I would want to interview this group and that group as sources to tell a more complete story.
And Constance, just while everyone's kind of thinking on that, I did just ask, as you were speaking, if people had worked or reported on food systems, and quite a few of our participants have. So it would be maybe nice after this also just to hear a couple of examples of how people have kind of reported already using sort of food systems in their work.
Okay, fantastic. I really appreciate that, and I'll look forward to that. But I just want to ask you that if you knew there was a water scarcity issue in a part of a country that you're covering, who would you want to talk to about water scarcity if we know there are many different underlying causes? All right, women as water users, policymakers, government, people, what's going on with people? And I think that's really critical. So these are really good responses, and I want to thank you, Busani and Bale. If you want to, water sellers, oh, very, very good. Yes, what's happening to them? What are those prices looking like? Where are they getting that water? Very good. So I'm going to move on, but civic leaders and women, that's excellent. Thank you for these. So we're just seeing that there are many different actors. And when Sabrina and I facilitate these activities with a wide group of stakeholders, they will use these causal analyses to identify all of the different stakeholders that they feel need to be at the table if we're actually going to have solutions that address the root causes. So you can see there are government actors, many different ministries. As you've already identified, there are women's groups, there's water groups, there's water sellers, youth groups, community-based organizations, NGOs, and then private sector plays a huge role in such an issue, all the way from those folks that are selling charcoal to the aggregators, people who are dealing with wildlife, and the list goes on. And then, of course, we have to have researchers and other colleagues from the international community, perhaps the media. Those are always spoken of as a key element towards solutions. And often we bring donors. So that is just an example of what happens when you really unpack these systems, the kinds of actors that need to be thinking about their future through these foresight processes. So I want to talk about another root cause, and that's on people's perceptions and deeply held beliefs. Sometimes those are barriers to tackling issues. So I wanted to know if you have or know of a perception or a strongly held belief about water scarcity that you're aware of. And I'd be delighted if there's a response in the chat box. Perceptions about water scarcity, perceptions about water that are strongly held beliefs, perceptions that may or may not be true. I'm going to kick us off.
Yeah, Busani said the perception that water is infinite.
Bravo, bravo. Thank you for that, Busani. I think that's absolutely true, that people think it's just going to continue. Are there others?
Just scarcity, Chimwemwe says scarcity of water being a punishment from the supreme being.
That is a great example. Thank you for that. And I think that this gets to a lot of what Dave was saying last time, which is, you know, to make a real behavioral change, you have to address those emotional issues as well as understanding the science. So thank you so much for those answers. Those are excellent. And so I guess I just wanted to finish this section by saying, you know, when we understand the system within which we're working, we have a much better sense of how our issues are interrelated and the different actors that are involved. And I'm seeing these additional answers, and I want to thank Neil Bale again, normalizing scarcity of water in rural areas. A belief that it's not so free after all. Well, that's excellent. Not so free after all. And I think I'm going to spend 1 second on these two slides. And the idea is that as our countries start to put together long-term plans to truly cut emissions and build a climate resilience within the country, what we're finding is that you need many of the ministries working together. So you've got different government sectors that are each working together and building their plans together so that they're taking this holistic approach that Vanessa talks about, in that every bit counts. So we can't just count on one or two sectors. And then the wider group of stakeholders, which I hope you'll note includes media and journalists, there are many other stakeholders that need to play a part and contribute to these low emission climate resilient plans. Sabrina, do I have a few minutes to go through the Kenya example?
Godfred's just arrived, so if possible, we could sort of let Godfred
switch out,
and then we can go back to the example, if that's okay.
Oh no, that'd be fantastic. Let me stop sharing here, and then we'll want to introduce Godfred. Do you want to introduce, or shall I?
Yeah, if you can, that's great. If not.
Fantastic. Well, I am delighted, we are delighted to welcome Godfred Boafo. And Godfred is a journalist with over 10 years of experience, I'm sure, and that continues to grow, but in multimedia journalism. So he's worked as the managing editor for Pulse Ghana and Business Insider, Sub-Saharan Africa. His main areas of interest, which are politics, international relations, and sports, we should add. And Godfrey writes for The Conversation. He co-hosts a multiple award-winning show, The Breakfast Show. He's on The Big Issue on City FM and City TV. And I will just mention that he has well over 175,000 followers on Twitter. So we are delighted to introduce Godfred. And Godfred, thanks so much for joining us. And please, the floor is yours. Our colleagues are delighted to be hearing from you.
Thank you very much for that rousing introduction. Like now I'm feeling completely overwhelmed, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation to share knowledge. I think that it's important that we're able to do this every once in a while to be able to move the space forward. So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for all those who have found the time to attend. Okay, so I guess if you can just give me where to start from, then I would just get the ball rolling. Hello.
Hi, Godfred.
You're waiting for us?
Yeah. No, I was just saying,
Okay.
if you can just give me a bit of a starting point, and so that I don't mix things up. So that I
No problem. All right. So our great colleagues here we're in this conversation around climate change, around food resilience, and the fact that there's so many different stakeholders. And how do we communicate with these different stakeholders? And, what are some of the forms? You're in TV, you're in radio, and, how do you build messaging for your different stakeholders? So
Okay.
You can talk in the general, and then maybe we'll ask you some questions also about climate change, and if you've had that opportunity. Thank you.
All right, then. So let me begin by saying that I operate in an environment, and I'm speaking specifically with Ghana, where the climate change conversation is lost on a lot of people. So I would say that if you look at we have what we call a national climate change policy, but I would not be able to count 1,000 people who actively know about the climate change national policy and what it means. It's basically a very niche conversation to have in Ghana at the moment. And that is where the difficulty in messaging comes up. I, for instance, work on multiple media platforms. I work in digital, I work in radio, I work in television. And during even news production periods where we're having news meetings, when a situation comes up and you raise the topic of a story that is linked with climate change. So you're talking about agrarian migration, you're talking about weather changes. People even fellow journalists in the newsroom will look at you and go like, what are you talking about? Nobody's really interested in this. Why are we not this? Let's go with the hard political stories. Let's go with the social interest stories that people really like. So even trying to develop a message for the audience is problematic from the formative stage in the newsroom, because it is not considered an important enough topic. And I've always found that a bit strange, considering that if you look at the 6 most important global topics that would interest any newsroom or any journalist, climate change would be one of them. It should be top 3 in my estimation right now, but it is not a conversation that is being had. And so there is really very little room to push climate change topics in the Ghanaian news space. For that matter, I normally do not like to generalize, but I've worked in my work for the conversation in the countries that I've been able to cover. I find that there are very few countries, bar maybe South Africa, maybe Kenya, for instance, and a few North African countries who pay particular attention to this particular theme. For a lot of African countries, this side of the world, the conversation is very niche and mostly a token so to say. So we have COP26 happening, and so now it's a good time to talk about it. So basically, it becomes a matter of a checkbox. So we have to cover COP26 as a news item. That is it. And that makes it difficult to work around, because if you are a journalist who is not at editor level, how are you able, and you have an interest in climate change, how are you going to suggest an idea to the newsroom that, look, let us do A, B, C, and D angles on climate change to be able to inform our audience, and then let us use it, let us do the stories in these particular formats to inform our audience. Most of the time you get shut down because there is constantly that battle between climate change as a news item and just hardcore eyeballs or clicks. Climate change doesn't get eyeballs, it doesn't get clicks. And once it does not do these two things, and it doesn't move audience ratings up if you're doing radio as well. So once it doesn't, you don't have it checking these boxes, it becomes really, really hard to push as an agenda. But I must also admit there is growing interest, because there's a new generation of journalists who are a bit more environmentally oriented, who are socially conscious, who on their own time and their own dime are pushing stories in different spaces, who are also agreeing to communicate with scientists in different areas that climate change affects. And the thing is this, we've not been able to draw the image properly for the audience. And I guess that is where those of us who are in the media space have a lot of work to do. We've not been able to draw the links. So somebody might just see a story and say, okay, the people might be asking themselves, why are we having a minor rainy season in October? In Ghana, that is very rare. We do not have minor rainy seasons in October. This is not a rainy season in Ghana, but it's been raining for the past 2 months. People are asking themselves these questions. Oh, why is it just raining? People are not asking themselves, where is it coming from? Why is this a major link? There hasn't even been, over the past 2 months, any news item. And I dare say even the station I work at is guilty of that. That has found a way to link the significant changes in weather, where we are having a lot more flash floods, where we are having less rain, and then the regular rainfall pattern has significantly changed. People are not drawing that link as well between the migration of farmers from the middle belt in Ghana, for instance, to the transitional belt. And those who have moved from the transitional belt are also struggling at the moment because they keep getting moved out of those spaces. People are not drawing the link between the two. People are also not drawing the link between the health causes, because now we have vector diseases. We have certain kinds of diseases that will also be born out of the effect of climate change. And once the ultimate link and the big picture has not been drawn, people just see these things in silos. And once the audience sees these things in silos, they do not see the overall impact. And that is where the lapse in our communication has come in. That is where the lapse in our strategy has come in. Now, if I take the work I do as a conversation over the past 2 years, what I've tried to do is to reach out to scientists who work in this space, to get them to explain their research in very simple language so that audiences can understand what the real impact is. The greatest way to tell a story as a journalist is the effect bit for the audience, in my experience. And so how does it affect you? So how does it affect a farmer? How does it affect a doctor or a nurse? How does it affect your everyday Joe, for that matter? And I found that it was easier to even get diasporan scientists to write and do research on that subject than it was to get Ghanaians. In my experience, in the 2 years I sent 25 commissions. Of the 25 commissions I sent, 15 were to Ghanaians, to Ghanaian scientists, 10 were to other academics from around the world. There was a 60% response rate from the academics in other countries as compared to those I spoke to in Ghana. And basically those who responded also said, well, we do not have too much time at the moment. Well, at the moment, our research is geared in a certain way. there wasn't a big willingness to even share the information. So one had to go to extremes because there is still a lot of experts speaking to experts, if you get my drift. You do not have a lot of people of experts speaking to the general people or speaking to just a general audience. There's still a lot of academics speaking to academics, experts speaking to experts, policymakers speaking to policymakers. So the conversation just seems to happen about people's heads. And so when you make that attempt as a journalist working in that space to say, okay, how can I help you to get this message that you are trying to send across? There's a difficulty because they're asking, I want to be able to tell my story. Why do I need you to tell the story? And I'm saying, well, it's your word, but I want to be able to put it in a form that will give you the greatest of impact. Most of the time, you would have academics or policymakers feel like you are dumbing down on their efforts. They want the lingua of what they have done to stay firm. They do not like it being changed. They do not like it being broken down. And that also affects the efficacy of communicating the impacts of climate change as well. And on that level, I also think that one part that we have struggled with is just trying to figure out different messaging for different platforms. Okay, because on radio, I have a different set of audience, and TV, I have a different set of audience, and then online, of course, I have a very different audience space. Now, trying to coin messages around climate change and the situations that we have now to match these different audiences, it's not something that is easy. So, for instance, I have a personal interest in climate change, but like I already told you, at editorial meeting, it's a conversation that is not happening because even if I raise this as an editor, the question I'm going to get asked is, how many people are truly interested in this? So I have to pick my battles. I have to pick my moments. So for instance, the president of Ghana speaking yesterday at COP26 is a significant opportunity for me. What it does is it gives me 2 days or 3 days at least worth of airtime to try and explain what the whole gamut of issues are, natural resources, and why African countries are fighting to stay with them when the Western world is saying, let's move away from fossil fuels to renewables. What does it mean for the economy? How does this affect the person at the market? How does this affect the person at the mine? How does this affect the person at the oil field? Those are the kind of conversations. So I have found an opportunity to make sure that conversation gets to on radio. I might not get a lot of feedback there, but eventually, once you say it enough times over a period of time, what I discover is that there is recall. So you start getting tweets, you start getting Facebook, you might get an email where somebody says, you sent this the other time. Oh, it's coming true. Why is it not raining? You can then draw those links through the voice that you have to raise those points. So sometimes it might not even be planned, but once there's an opportunity, take that opportunity and interject with that and let the audience know, particularly for me and my working space. Now, for what I do online, though, I find that a bit easier to match what I'm doing with the audience because once I get a commission from an academic that is dealing with the subject, we fine-tune it, we write it, we revise it, and then we distribute it. And most of the time, it is distributed in such a way that the angling is interesting for the general audience. The headlines are interesting for the general audience. So you do get a certain level of feedback on that. And like I said, the way we write is such that we are always looking at how it affects you, or we are trying to explain the how or the why. And we found out that audiences respond significantly to these two things. Now, sometimes you might say, oh, why do I need to know this? I already know that. You'll be surprised at the number of people who do not know this. And so a simple trick we have at the conversation always is explain climate and explain in very simple language 5 reasons why, or 3 reasons why agrarian farmers are is suffering. That works. It moves quicker and it gets people talking and it gets people reading to start with, and then the bigger conversation can happen in that space. And then just the final point as well on what I think we need to be, media in Africa needs to be paying attention to get messages about climate change out of which gaps need to be filled. I think I've, in my overall presentation, just touched on pieces of that. I think that we need to understand the audience that we are engaged with and find ways of making sure that climate change is an interesting topic for them. We also have a situation where sometimes even we in the media do not have the training required and the understanding required to treat climate change topics with the kind of seriousness it deserves. We tend to get carried away by the pressure of newsroom. So you have quotas to meet, you have viewing rates to meet, you have click rates to meet. It becomes a bit difficult then to focus, even if that is your interest. But you have to stick with that and find ways of making sure that you're able to introduce these things that interest you regarding climate change in the work that you do. That is the best way to get it and grow it from there. Once you're able to tell those stories in an interesting way, then you'll be able to make progress. I guess I have 10 minutes. I have touched on a couple of things. I'll leave the rest to taking questions.
That's great. I mean, Godfred, I think I speak for everyone. I think we've been having lots of comments come in the chat box and everyone just absolutely agreeing. You've said about 20 things that I want to ask questions, but we will open the floor. I'm sure there's lots of really good questions. So if anyone has a question for Godfred, please put your hand and then you can sort of unmic, put your video on. We can see Godfred. It'd be nice for him to see you as well. So if there's any burning questions, please put up your hands. If not, I'll have to rein Constance and I back in because I know we both have many questions. So let's just see. Have we got any questions? If not, I'll go back to some of the chat points and draw those.
It would be good to hear some of those comments that were made.
Yeah, and let me try and pick through a couple of these. Yeah, Marcus was saying in Mozambique. Marcus, I don't know if you want to speak up. You're welcome to take the floor to take this question. Marcus, do you want to put this question? I don't know if Marcus's mic is. Pierre, can you see if Marcus's mic? Maybe not.
Yeah, his mic seems to be connected.
Okay.
I don't know if he doesn't want to. Yeah, technically it seems to be connected, but I don't see it open.
Sure. Chimwemwe, I think you had a really nice intervention, and I think this would be quite a critical question for Godfred around politics potentially. Chimwemwe, do you want to just raise that question? Chimwemwe, do you want to speak up?
Can you unmute? I love this picture of you speaking, but we'd like to see you actually speaking. Chimwemwe. Busani has a question.
Yeah. Busani, go ahead. Hi, Busani. If you want to unmute, and you can ask Godfred your question.
Oh dear.
Yes.
Greetings to you all. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Godfred, thank you so much for your presentation. I really liked it. And I'm glad that you actually touched on the issue of working in silos of scientists, researchers, policymaking, etc. I have actually followed the conversation quite seriously, and I've used some of your content, in my writing. I just want to find out, I have encountered difficulties getting African researchers to talk about their research, and in particular, to comment really at a spur of the moment. How could we actually get scientists and researchers to actually not fear the media, but to open up and that we can use the content? Because I believe African researchers have so much to offer, but we are not able to tap into that.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. That is really good. And it comes to the theme of developing sources. I think as journalists, one mistake we make is is not developing informal relationships with some of the people we will later on fall back on as resource persons. So what I normally do is I follow the conversations, and I don't mean for the conversation that I work with, but I just follow the general conversations. And what helps is once in a while, I just reach out to a person who I feel is interesting and say, oh, hello, I've been following your work, keep up the good work. And I found that over a period of time, I've developed an extensive network. And once there's a topic that emerges, I find it much easier to reach out to these people and say, hey, hi, it's been a while. This is what is trending. Can I get your thoughts on A, B, C, D? It's an icebreaker. Normally, breaking the ice is what we struggle with, because the approach most of us as journalists have is to just send an email and say, oh, I'm a journalist with ABC News. This just happened. Do you have comments for me? And because most of them do not have that relationship with you, most of them will say, well, they don't know you, they don't trust you. Well, they won't tell you that in their email, but as journalists, we all know this. If they don't feel comfortable sharing their work with you, knowing that they can trust you with their words for you to say exactly what they want to say, it will be difficult for them to come back to you. So what we need to do to get some of these researchers who are really quite shy, but are also some of them are really, really also interested in sharing their work, is to try and reach out, not during the news cycle, but outside of the news cycle. We as journalists must be actively vested in making acquaintances. I'm not saying friendships, but just drawing acquaintances with these people. And once a situation arises, it becomes easier to reach out to them and ask them for quotes or to ask them for their thoughts on some of these things.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Chimwemwe, I see your video's on. Do you want to ask a question? Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Where are you joining us from, Chimwemwe?
Okay. All right. Like mostly the people do focus on maybe negative effects of climate change. So should we say that the only way to write stories about climate change is all about writing negatives, or we should also focus on the positives?
Timo, if you could speak up a bit, your question was not too clear for me. I didn't get the first part.
Chimwemwe, can you repeat quick?
Okay. Like the people, yes. How should like reporters be able to be writing stories concerning climate change on positive issues rather than just negative?
Still missing. Sabrina, if you can help me a bit with what he said. I'm still not very clear with the question.
Sure, I think, and Constance, you can jump in. I think what Chimwemwe is asking is how kind of can journalists grapple with the more sort of complex issues, and if I might tag on my own question to add to Chimwemwe's, it's like, I think you touched on it really early, talking about the season now in Ghana and saying this is really unusual. And one of the things we're trying to unpack here in the training is how can we engage the audience also into these longer term trends? So, how can you try and say this really strange season or weather right now is actually part of something much bigger, and actually in 20 years we're going to have this every season, so if I may, so it's Chimwemwe, I think, was asking that, and I've just tagged on a little bit of a question to that as well.
Okay, so I think what needs to happen is, look, let's understand this. I'm not a climate change expert. Very few journalists would be. What we have are the resources and a bit of information. So the most important thing for us to do is to learn to focus on the resources that are available and draw them into use. So to be able to have the long-term conversations about climate change and the impacts, to be able to draw the audience in, we need to have a bit of education, which is why something like this is what AICCRA is doing is important. Because what it does do is to draw awareness to the fact that climate change is actually an essential news item for a journalist to monitor. I think that is the big boulder in the middle of the road. The fact that a lot of newsrooms still do not consider having a story or following up on climate change issues, be it short-term, be it medium-term or long-term, as a significant enough news item to even focus resources on for a reporter to go and either study up on, attend a seminar on, or or do a feature piece or a documentary on. Because the question that you get asked, if you were used to as an editor, if a reporter sends you a budget to say he's going to the northern region to figure out why yam suddenly the yam production numbers have dropped and why yam farmers are migrating from the north to the middle belt. The question an editor is going to ask is, how many people are going to watch the story if it's for TV, or how many people are going to read the story? And so immediately the whole even resource allocation in the newsroom does not make it possible. It makes it really, really difficult to be able to draw attention to this particular topic, and to also encourage the audience to grow with this kind of topic. So it's not easy to do, but I think it's an ongoing battle that we need to fight. And on the positive side, I think significant progress is being made on a generation of journalists who definitely are interested in climate change and who are pushing through the boundaries of newsroom politics and bureaucracy to get stories done, to push the stories out there, even if it is on a very limited platform.
Great, fantastic. Constance, I know you have a question. I can hand over to you. And then does anyone else have? Well, Constance does a question.
You're getting some amazing comments. I just want you to know, Godfred, we're going to forward all of these comments. But I think, and I'm just going to also build on Doreen. She says that climate change issues are not considered sexy, yet they're the defining moment for us. And I wonder about it because I remember BBC just weeks ago finally said, we are going to report on climate change every day, no matter what, right? But I also know that if it just becomes, kind of all dismal news, which Chimwewe was trying to, I think, point out, how do we make it positive, one, and a positive in a sense that there are solutions when we talk about it, but also can we say when we're covering a topic like yam production, just what you just mentioned, how do we bring climate into stories that don't look like they're about climate change at the beginning? I'm learning a lot from you about this number of clicks business, because that's, you've got to get those clicks.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting situation that you've described. And talking about solutions is important. 2 years ago, a colleague of mine did some work, brilliant piece of solutions journalism, where he outlined how, and he's the one who actually brought it to my attention, that this matter of farmers moving from the northern belt, which is basically the breadbasket of Ghana, to the middle belt, because they were no longer finding a proper rainfall pattern to work with. And then once they got to the middle belt as well, the same thing was happening there. So now they also had to move. And he spent basically 2 weeks on the road doing this. The only way he was able to do this was with external funding. But once he brought it to the fore, he was also able to tell the unique story of how mobile technology was helping. And he decided to focus rather on how mobile technology was helping these farmers to learn more about climate change and how to address some of the difficulties that they were facing on their farms and how they could improve their chances of improving their harvest. And I found it interesting that he decided to focus on the positives. because in the space that we work in, they say a rather morbid quote that says blood sells best. And basically the interpretation is bad news sells. Okay, so even if you bring back a positive story, sometimes the consideration is, well, and so what? Nobody really likes the good news. We want to see the stories about the burnt farms. We want to see the stories about the poor harvest, about the farmers who have lost their crops. Or there is never really a focus on this situation is happening because of this. The root cause is never important. And once you decide to focus on the root cause, you are just basically going to get a one line in there. The focus would rather be on, okay, this one got burnt, it cost X amount of money, and that happened. So you're also going to require a certain level of maturity as a journalist to be able to figure out which side of the divide to be on when it comes to telling these stories, about making it sexy. That is skill. That comes with skill. And if you are not a skilled journalist, you might struggle. But that also comes with development, that comes with time. So I guess the takeaway from this is we need to be able to find nice ways of telling these stories, interesting ways of telling these stories. Look, there are documentaries, there are this, but in the spaces that you are in, do you think that if I told this story using the local language, it would work? I work at an English-speaking station, but I've told stories in the local language on an English-speaking station before. It shocked people because they're like, they do not expect to turn on their radio to hear me speaking a local language because we primarily speak English. But people paid attention because, come to think of it, everybody speaks the local language first before they speak English. So even once the shock value is gone, they will pay attention. So what you need to figure out is a shock value. Okay, that does not necessarily break the ethics or break the standards of the media organization you work for or the platform that you work for, but allows you to communicate the message in such a way that people just pay attention in a way that would not be how normally they would respond. And so I guess that is the question we need to ask ourselves when reporting on this. The question is, find the golden thread. Okay, that's what what I'll leave you with. And by the golden thread, I mean find out, ask yourself, why is this important? And once you're able to identify why this is important, then look at the situation you are in, your own unique space, and find out what is the most different way I can tell this story. And go in that direction. Do not be afraid to go in those directions. I think a lot of us are also very much afraid of going against the grain because we work in sometimes very conservative media setups. And so we might not have the allowances to try new things, but work within those constraints, but still be able to tell those positive stories. Look, positive stories work. You'll be surprised at how much people want to hear the success stories of how people are combating climate change, of how people are finding those unique ways. So I think positive stories, just find a unique way in your own unique environment and you'll be fine.
Fantastic. Godfred, I know you probably have to go. Would you have time for one more question from Mawe? He's had his hand up.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Mawe, you've got the last question. So over to you, and then there's a couple more in the chat I'll send to you afterwards, Godfred.
Okay.
But thank you. Mawe.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much, and good afternoon to Godfred. I'm a big fan from City CBS, and it was a very nice presentation you put out there. So yeah, so I wanted to touch a bit on the technical nature of climate change reporting. It's a deeply technical area, and even us that have some level of working within it sometimes struggle to explain certain concepts. But for me, I don't know. Taking it to the expensive nature and how difficult it is for newsrooms to really focus on issues like that. What do you think about media practitioners focusing on targeting projects that are into climate change? I think there are quite a lot of them coming up. I work on communications for one of those, and sometimes it's really difficult finding media people who are able to really craft a good story out of a program or a workshop that you organize. And it's mostly just about, company A has organized a training for so and so, and then that is where the story ends. But for me, I think that we could go beyond it. Say, if you want to talk about an issue like charcoal burning, would you rather be linking it to, say, a company like Zarcoal in Ghana that is into using coconut husks to create charcoal rather than burning down trees? Would that be a nice angle to pick a story from? Because maybe people wouldn't really, we've heard over and over and over.
Yes, Maui. A very, very succinct appreciation of the Ghanaian the Ghanaian way of reporting on climate change. It is true. If you are to send, and let me just confirm what he just said, if you get sent a press release from a group that is working on climate change, you might get it tossed in the dustbin, or they'll just regurgitate the press release you sent for you. But here's the thing, okay? I think that the bodies that also work in climate change owe a responsibility to newsrooms to educate them. Most of the time, like I said, and this takes me back to the silos. Folks who work in climate change sometimes feel that they are a bit too smart for your regular journalists, and so do not interact. They just see them as tools, not as partners. And so there isn't a really regular interaction between them. So they do not speak your language. A lot of journalists will see these invitations as an avenue to, one, make money for their stations because they're going to get adverts, or two, it's an assignment. It's a good way to get out of the office. So they do not really care. And the lack of care is what you would find translating into the lack of understanding of even the events or the projects they attended, and reflects in the kind of story that will be published, will be written and published. So a way around this is, and I'm dealing with this on two levels. I'll come to your Zarcoal experiment, your Zarcoal example. An effective way of dealing with this is to have a continuous relationship between newsrooms and groups that work in climate change, where it is not transactional, but it is a partnership. The transactional nature of it means that, I'm expecting group A, B, and C to send me a press release. Have they sent the press release? What did it say? But if there is a constant engagement, the journalist starts understanding the language. There's an appreciation of the effort that goes into these projects. That is when you start getting invited along on trips, and it is not just a free holiday, but actually a genuine opportunity to learn and to contribute. Once that is done, that is when you start getting the quality writing that you are looking for, the understanding of the climate issues that you are looking for. Then the second part is the link to projects. The difficulty there is a lot of newsrooms, and again, I'm speaking from the experience of a Ghanaian newsroom, we'll look at a story like that as a sales pitch. So you write a story like that, they'll tell you, well, this looks like an editorial. So why did you work on a story that looks like an editorial? So it's a very gray area to work with. But what you can do is where we talk about the matching media to different audiences. If you're able to find the platform that fits that angle, use it. Something like that might work as a written profile piece, as compared to maybe a documentary piece on radio or on television. Because on television, then you are showing their brand, maybe you might be showing their factory, you might have to speak to their employers and employees. So it looks very much commercial. So in using the points of successful organizations invested in climate change and invested in sustainable use of the environment, you have to be able to get creative and then find which platform matches this. that is when you are able to break that boundary of what exists. So I hope that helps Maui. But the big one for me, I keep saying, since you work in communications, I suggest that you also invest in partnerships. Keep communicating with the newsrooms that are your friends. Those that are not your friends, invest in them becoming your acquaintances. Let them know what you do, how you do it, and why it matters. I think that is the most important part that we keep missing. We do not let newsrooms understand why it matters. That is why a lot of newsrooms, editors, journalists look down on these things and do not consider the news value. The only reason why COP26 made front page headlines in Ghana is because the president spoke. If the president hadn't spoken, that story I'm telling you gets to page 54 of the national newspaper. It does not make the front page. That is the only way. But significant things have been said there since Sunday that necessarily should make the front page. For instance, the conversation about why Africa is going to continue to rely on fossil fuels. Ghana is a big part of that because Ghana keeps discovering oil, and Ghana is not going to give that up anyway. So that is a big conversation. If you look at the link between oil and Ghana's economy, if you are able as a journalist to tell these stories, so COP26 is happening, Ghana as a country that drills oil, makes a lot of money from oil. There's a significant conversation about fossil fuels and renewables. Where does Ghana stand in all of this? There's a very good conversation to be had. No news editor can turn away from this, can run away from this. This fits into politics, this fits into the business page, this fits into whichever sector you want it to fit in. So identify it, let the story stand out, let the story be profound, let the language be profound, and you'll be fine.
Wow. Well, that's an amazing that's an amazing summary. And I think so. Just to finalize on, just to basically draw a huge round of thank you from all of us. I mean, I'm just in like, wow, there was so much. And just to sort of respond, one of the comments, Godfred, someone said, oh, I wish you had slides or how we could capture this. So Godfred, I think what we're going to do is take the transcript and we'll have a go at trying to put all your key messages into some kind of summary that we can share. So we'll check that with you first. But I think you've had so many tips and yeah, some really sort of like strong recommendations. So we'll make sure to capture this into a something we can share with the wider group. So thank you. And just a huge thank you from everyone here for your time. I wish we could be all together. And there's so much more to unpack. And I think I just sort of speak for everyone that this is hopefully the start of some kind of more engagement that we can do all together. I think we had a couple of comments in the chat group as well about setting up more of a conversation with media and climate change focal points across Africa. Like how can we get more sharing and advice? So we'll be in touch with kind of next steps in this regard as well, Godfred. So just from everyone here, a huge thank you for your time, Godfred. And yeah, just thank you for just so many insightful pieces of golden nuggets and golden threads that you gave us. So really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much, Godfred.
Thank you, Godfred.
Bye. Well, with that fire and energy that we had from Godfred, I'm just going to hand over to Constance for just a last, essentially we're going to try and use a Foresight exercise and process to try and bring in some of those key insights and weave some of those things together for the last section of today's training.
Fantastic. Boy, all right. We're not going to say that we're trying to follow a great act because that's a challenge. What we are going to say is we want to build on all that we've just learned. That was just packed with nuggets that we can take forward, and also the real realities of what the media is facing. So I'm going to talk about backcasting, which Sabrina has already shown as one of the tools that we use when we are doing our Foresight work, and it puts you in a little bit different position. So backcasting allows us, after we have defined a vision and the desirable future that we want, we actually then work backwards from that assumed achieved vision to identify what actions we took, what partnerships we built, what barriers we overcame, what policy changes we did that connect the future to the present. So stay with me here. So in backcasting, what we're really asking is, how did we get here? We put ourselves into the future and we ask, how did we get here? We are now shifting our mindsets to as if we have already achieved. So quickly on the steps, we are right now in this moment stepping into 2035. We are going to position ourselves as media people, as agriculturalists, as climate scientists, and say we've successfully achieved the vision. So we are standing in 2035, and then we're going to look back to today in 2021 and say, what do we remember about how we got there? What actions, what partnerships, what policies did we carry out? And we're going to remember the barriers we faced, and we're going to talk about how we overcame those to get here. And then we will characterize when some of those activities took place. But we're going to keep it simple for now. So in this exercise, remember, we are in 2035, and at this point, we've managed to achieve a major reduction in greenhouse gases from agriculture. As you all know, can that get muted?
Yeah, sorry, I'm
Thank
trying
you.
to mute there. Sorry.
Very kind. Yeah, I tried to as well. Thank you so much. All right. So agriculture is a major emitter of greenhouse gases, but we all need it to have a functioning food system. So we're going to say, yes, we have reduced these greenhouse gases, but the media really contributed to this outcome. So let's take this example, and I'm going to invite you to write into the chat box your responses. So the farmers and the pastoralists across Africa are now using climate resilient agroecological approaches to meet the food and nutrition security requirements in our countries. Okay, so that's what we've achieved in 2035. Now, write in the chat box, what do you remember about how the media supported this outcome? How did the media support this outcome? What did you report on? What did you do? What did you, how did you get us to reduce those emissions and get people to take on agricultural practices? And I'm going to ask you to write it in the chat box, but if you want to just shout it out, that is great too. What did we do as the media to support this outcome of farmers taking on these practices to adapt to climate change, to reduce emissions? What did we do? All right, Busani, the media profiled the challenges and experiences of farmers with water scarcity and poor soils. Fantastic. All right, what else? So that sounds a bit like a big campaign. What else did we do? These are important things to think about. You made a difference. What did you do as the media?
Yeah, and I think you can try to think about what a lot of what Godfred was saying there. I think, you know, there were some blocks about the editorial team, about stories not being so that's obviously like what Constance just showed earlier about a root cause, you know, trying to get stories given the green light by an editorial team. So in 15 years, how would we have solved that? How would we have changed the way stories are endorsed? And maybe actually in 15 years, we might not even have an editor process. We might be doing sort of open media or something.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. And that's actually going to be our next question. But let's look at what we've got. We've got profiled farmers, build the capacity for reporting relevant to these issues. projecting climate smart agriculture projects in the media. Fantastic. Brina Brown Field Days, well done. Okay, we probed the national implementation with attention to NDCs. All right, thank you. We were focusing in on organic matter, on organic manures for these agroecological systems, afforestation, identified potential ways for continued greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced, and brought issues to light by having those friends as scientists. All right, I am going to now build on what Sabrina just brilliantly brought to us. And that is, okay, we had to get our editors, we had to get media in general excited about climate change. So how did we get media, how did the media actors overcome resistance to reporting on climate change? What changes did we make to overcome the resistance? All right. And fantastic, Margarita, these are great responses, featured renewable energy. Now let's take it back to our conscious funding and placing of behavior change ads on digital and multimedia platforms. Fantastic. Making governments accountable. Wow. Yes, some serious advocacy work. We wrote stories that emphasize the use, the success stories. All right. What was that you just mentioned, Sabrina? Open platforms? What was that?
No, just, I mean, when we think about the future, you know, if you asked 15 years ago, what would be the main way people are consuming media? I don't, you know, it's just trying to get that sense of actually in 15 years time, the way technology is evolving, we might have a very, very different way of reporting and very different way people are. And we know already that a huge amount of consumption of media is on people's phones. And with that, it's within social networks. So yeah, just trying to also kind of open up this potential for something very different in sort of 10 or 15 years, and how you're going to be involved in that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Sabrina. Okay, I see Nita has already said, let's involve the youth and youth editors. They are the future. Fantastic. And getting our messages into local languages. I like that. That sparked a new interest for Godfred, didn't it? All right, I am going to fantastic special programs, reporters trained in climate change reporting. These are fantastic. All right, I'm going to ask one last question and then we're going to have to start on towards our closing. But did you find any other groups, stakeholders that you engaged to achieve where we are today in 2035? Were there new people that you've befriended to partner with? So, all right. Okay, I like this. Indigenous communities. We partnered with Indigenous communities. Are there a couple of others? All right, I am going to say, let's see if we get one more stakeholder group. Who's new that you would bring in to really move the needle on climate change? Donors, brava. Annie, thank you for that. Youth environmental activists. This is brilliant. This is fantastic. So I just want to reiterate that, and leaders at all levels. Oh yes, get those local authorities on board. Well done. And development partners. So there's this huge opportunity, and we were just highlighting this tool of backcasting because it really does make you think a little bit differently about how you would strategize to achieve the outcome that you want. And that is that media is making a difference in the climate change solution. So I think you can actually use this in some of your own strategic planning as you think about the future. And so with that, I just am glad to introduce backcasting, and these responses are amazing, and you can already see a plan coming together. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Constance. That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think we didn't have too much time to go into that, but I think it's why are we bringing across this kind of sense of how do you think about future trends and how do you work backwards to say, how can I be involved in that? Because I think we heard from Godfred quite a lot of, sticky issues right now. And we're trying to really move this lever forward and say, okay, how can we really sort of work around or bring in a different thread? And I think Maue also had a really good point about whenever a climate change orientated event is written about, it's often that it would just be describing A to B versus like, what is some other thread that you could bring out instead of discussing just that. So that's really useful. And I think just before we close, because we did start with food systems, Basani shared a really nice link to his article. I know we have to close in very, very shortly, but Basani, would you just like to just give us a kind of 1 minute to say how you maybe kind of brought about the topic about food systems and transforming food systems? It would be really nice just to hear a little very short nugget of your work.
Thanks, Sabri. Basically, I just wanted to understand what are food systems. I in fact started off with that question, that what are food systems and why should we be worried? And I got to interview a researcher, Daniela Nuremberg, who's actually a food advocate as well. And my key question was just that could you just unpack it for us? What does it mean? And I got to understand that, look, it's very interconnected when you talk about the food system, really, from the time you plant the seeds, you harvest, you process, up to the time you consume that food. It's a whole system which will even include your transporters, your seed producers, your policymakers. So it helped me highlight that when you talk about food systems, it's something that is complex and interconnected. Yeah.
Perfect. And Basani, can I ask, did you have any issues to try and, within that story, link it to climate change? Because a lot of the work we're trying to do is to show that, people don't maybe like, how can they get involved or engaged in climate change? And food systems in Africa are the most kind of impacted. Did you draw any threads or?
Yes, in fact, thank you, on several fronts, one of them being on policy. How can actually policymakers who are part of this, what kind of policies are supporting sustainable agriculture production?
Okay.
And also the issue of gender. How do we actually bring in women into the food conversations?
Sure.
And for me, that was one critical part of actually the food systems, narrative. And that for women, very, very important when we bring in women when we talk about climate change. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Basani. And I just encourage everyone, Basani shared the link earlier in the chat to have a read. And just to encourage us next session, next Monday, if there are any other colleagues here that have work that we can review and discuss together, that's also really valuable. So please feel free to share. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody for today's session. We just hope that it sort of at least brought some idea around the critical nature of understanding both systems and different causes. And so when we think about who's in this wider system, who maybe we need to bring in as critical stakeholders, what are some of the different causes? And I think Godfred had a really nice example there with the yam prices and starting to think, is there a different angle that I can bring into the story? And I think Constance took us through this really good example about the water crisis and starting to think, is there different ways we could maybe report this? So thank you everybody for the really insightful questions, to our guest speaker as well. We will meet again next week, Monday, for part 3. And we'll be going into a little bit more around information and evidence, and also starting to really unpack how would we report. And we're going to take some examples of climate change issues and how we could maybe frame a story around those. So really, hopefully picking up a much more sort of practical element to what we heard with some of Godfred's conversation today in terms of really unpacking how we could bring it together. So we'll be meeting again, same link, same time, and meeting on Monday. And one last question we had, I think we had an idea about, could we set up a WhatsApp group, etc. And in the end of our last session, we will be really using that to talk about next steps and the support and the sort of mentoring and how we can take this forward. So that's really nice to see some excitement and ideas to keep this community going. So thank you, everybody. If anyone wants to put on their videos and say hi, that's really nice. We always love to connect because we're all a bit far away. So just if everyone wants to put on their videos, we can say goodbye. If anyone wants to unmic, tell us where they are, etc. That's awesome.
Hello and
hi.
Super.
It's Romy. Where are you?
Yeah, I'm in Swaziland.
Hi, Iswatini. Hi.
Hi. Are you
Hi.
safe in Swaziland? Hi.
Yeah, I'm almost safe. Eh?
Wonderful.
Almost safe.
Almost safe.
Stay safe, please.
Tiwange. Hi.
Yes, I will stay
Hi.
Wonderful.
Bye.
Hi, Dorcas.
Hi, Dorcas.
Dorcas is from the Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you for being here.
Neo is in the car.
Pleased to
Hi,
meet you.
Nimola.
I don't know what happened to my camera, so I'm very sorry about that. Next time, but I'm still here.
Hey, Priska.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Look.
Hello.
Lasimela. Hello.
Hi, Maureen.
Hi, how are you?
Hey,
Kelvin.
Kelvin. Kelvin's in the car again.
Alita.
Ah, Elita, hi.
Hi, Alita.
Oh, great. And there's Bridget. Hi, Bridget. Thanks for coming and
Hi,
showing us your
Bridget.
face. You've been
Hey,
great,
how are you?
great making this happen.
So,
and Pierre,
Bridget,
thank
nice to see you.
can we remain for just for a while? Sabrina and Constance and Pierre, can we remain for just for a few minutes?
Yes.
Of
Minute or
course.
two. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
You're asking to stay because you want the party, eh? You hear the music. That's why you want to
Yes.
stay longer.
Okay. Thank you, Priska. Thank you.
Thank
to
you.
Manuel.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on
Thanks,
Monday.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Mr. P.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Annie. Great comments, everyone. Gabrielle. Vale.
See you on Monday.
See you Monday.
Yes. See you Monday. Bye, Mr. P.